Thanks for joining us on To The Point with Alex Bell, where we dive deeper into issues impacting Northern California. I'm Becca Habiger. Alex Bell has the night off. In tonight's main point, the futures of hundreds of thousands of dreamers are once again on the line. A federal appeals court ruled that the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, also known as Daca, is unlawful. This is the program, you may know, that protects hundreds of thousands of young adult migrants from deportation and permits them to work in the U.S. Daca will continue for now while a lower court reviews the program, but it's uncertain what will happen next. Recent data show there are more than 12,000 Daca recipients in our region. The Sacramento metro area is home to an estimated 5,800 Daca recipients. Another roughly 3,400 live in the Stockton area, and in Modesto, there are nearly 3,000 Daca recipients. The Biden administration hopes to make changes to the program. The Department of Homeland Security moved to codify Daca into federal regulations just back in August. But what is on the line? Let's take a look. The Obama administration first established the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program known as Daca in 2012. It was created through an executive action. Daca recipients, also known as Dreamers, have to renew their status every 2 years. The program does not provide a pathway to citizenship. Fast forward to 2017, when former President Trump was in power, his administration declared a phasing out of the program.
I'm here today to announce that the program known as Daca that was effectuated under the Obama administration is being rescinded.
The University of California became the first university to sue the Department of Homeland Security for its actions, alleging rights were violated. In 2020, the Supreme Court struck down the Trump administration's attempt to end the program. Months later, in 2021, President Biden began his term. He moved to strengthen the Daca program on his first day in office. But in July of 2021, a federal judge in Texas ruled the program unlawful, saying President Obama exceeded his powers by creating an immigration program without the approval of Congress. The Biden administration not only appealed that decision, it also tried codifying Daca into administrative law. So flash forward to this week. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the lower court's ruling that the program is unlawful, but said the lower court must review its decision once again in light of the Biden administration's efforts to make Daca into law. It also allowed the Daca protections to remain in place for now for existing recipients, though it shut the program off to new applicants. Thursday morning, protesters in Washington, D.C. marched in support of Daca.
I've been a Daca recipient for 10 years now. I am currently 27.
Karen Fierro Ruiz lives in California.
We don't know what's going to be happening. We don't have a clear timeline. And so I'm just thinking of how am I going to be planning my next couple of months?
She's also the federal policy and advocacy manager for United We Dream, which says it's the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country.
Worst case scenario is that, we do lose Daca and that we don't have those permanent protections at the end of the day.
She says Daca recipients should pay extra attention to their renewal dates so their status doesn't expire while the program is in limbo.
It's really important for Daca recipients to stay informed and to ensure that the information they're getting are from reputable resources.
Veronica Garcia is staff attorney with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center.
Now we are waiting to see what happens at the district court again around the final regulation that was issued by the Biden administration around Daca. So there are a lot of questions, a lot of community concerns, and definitely a need to do a lot of advocacy for a permanent solution, right? Because Daca was never meant to be permanent.
She says she'd like to see federal lawmakers pass legislation that makes Daca protections permanent. For now, it's on thin ice. As Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton said after the district court ruled Daca unlawful in 2021, only Congress has the authority to write immigration laws, and the president is not free to disregard those duly enacted laws as he sees fit. If you are one of the thousands of Daca recipients in our area, we want to hear your story. Send us an email at tothepoint@abc10.com. We now know the man accused of killing a Merced family of 4 found dead by a farmer in a remote orchard was a former employee of the family business. The Merced County Sheriff is calling this evil behavior and says what this person did has affected our world. The motive for the killings now appears to be a disagreement over money. The suspect was also convicted of a home invasion in 2005 where he held people captive. Kurt Rivera has been in Merced County throughout the day, where law enforcement has been working with little to no sleep since the family disappeared.
Well, you don't hear a lot of tragic stories on this scale here in the city of Merced. Talking to the sheriff here, Vern Warnke, he says in his 43 years he can't recall anything like this. The loss of 4 members of the same family has hit this community very hard. The sheriff says his officers have been working around the clock.
I've got investigators, 24 or more investigators that have been on this case for 3-4 days now and running on absolute minimal sleep. Definitely the most evil, sadistic individual I think has ever come across here. And I've said it before, I'll say it now, there's a special place in hell for this guy.
The sheriff says family members are coming from around the world to come here to Merced to mourn. A vigil for the family will be held tonight in downtown Merced at the Bob Hart Plaza at 7 p.m.
Kurt, thank you. The family of the victims want to clarify they are not asking for any donations or assistance at this point. There's no GoFundMe campaign or any other donation links set up, so anything claiming to be a fundraiser is probably fraudulent, they say. The Merced County Sheriff's Office says they will be the ones who make the announcement if that changes. It's been decades since Kristen Smart disappeared. Now we await the verdict in the trial of those accused of killing her. Why the conviction could be an uphill battle. Right now, jurors are going through a veritable mountain of evidence in the case against Paul Flores and his father, Ruben Flores. They're charged in the 1996 murder of Stockton's Kristen Smart. A verdict could come down at any moment, but some legal experts say a lack of forensics makes scoring a conviction an uphill battle. Why? Well, simply put, Kristen Smart's remains have never been recovered. Now, this is a case that has captured nationwide attention. True crime podcasts and TV specials have been produced about her disappearance. As we wait for a verdict tonight, we take a look back. In May 1996, Stockton's Kristen Smart, a student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, went missing. She was last seen returning to a dorm room after an off-campus party. Paul Flores, her classmate, was the last person she was seen with. It was not until 2002 that she was determined legally dead by police. By 2011, investigators found potential evidence in Paul Flores' old dorm room. And 5 years later, in 2016, the FBI found, quote, items of interest. They are seen here digging through dirt at an excavation site on the edge of Cal Poly. In 2019 and 2020, investigators began monitoring Paul Flores, who was then a person of interest. Search warrants were obtained. In 2021, search warrants were issued for Paul's father, Ruben Flores. Cadaver dogs were even brought to his San Luis Obispo County home. A few months later, Paul Flores was named the prime suspect and now faces murder charges. His father faces accessory to murder. The San Luis Obispo County District Attorney said that Smart was killed during an attempted rape by Paul Flores in his dorm room and that his father helped hide her body.
Forensic physical evidence was located, and yes, we believe it's linked to Kristen, and yes, we did find physical evidence at least 2 homes.
ABC 10 is in Monterey County, where this murder trial has been underway, and a verdict could be announced as soon as tomorrow. After the break, women have long been left out of the story of the American Railroad. How one Sacramento museum is highlighting their contributions now. All right, you might want to check your bank accounts. Families could get a little more than $1,000 as soon as tomorrow. Governor Newsom first raised the idea of a middle-class tax refund back in March. He wanted it to be tied to vehicle ownership due to rising gas prices, but Democrats in the legislature won in negotiations, basing the payments on income. Political analyst Steve Swat, however, notes what some groups say is a major flaw. Those who need the money most, like low-income earners and people on a fixed income who aren't required to file taxes, are left out.
There are about 3 million Californians who did not file income taxes because they don't make enough money. And to get this rebate, you have to have filed income taxes this year. And many of these 3 million individuals are disabled and certainly very poor. And this has angered many of the advocates who see this as a slight.
If you e-filed or use direct deposits for your tax return, you'll get your rebate between tomorrow and the 28th. Those who did not file a tax return electronically will get mailed debit cards between October 25th and December 10th. The rest of the cards should be out by January 15th. Now, the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad put California on the map, as we know, and helped spark an economic boom that would eventually create the largest economy in the United States, 5th largest in the world. Women played a major role in the development, but have largely been left out of the narrative for more than a century. Photojournalist Xavier Uriarte went to the California Railroad Museum in Old Sacramento, where they're working to get the women of the railroad back into history.
California State Railroad Museum was founded in 1981.
At the Railroad Museum, we say that our lives are made of railroad stories and that we tell the stories of the railroad through the stories of people.
Railroad history runs through all of our lives, and in that respect, it is a museum of culture and history that's directly related to our lives. We want people to see themselves in history. There's no more diverse history than railroad history because of all of the people that were involved.
I've been coming to this museum since I was a kid. My grandfather used to bring me here, and I have only seen 2 women in the museum and their mannequins with no stories.
We did an exhibit here at the California State Railroad Museum that was a completely student-run exhibit, and so 16 graduate students chose a subject matter. They chose an area in the museum and they created an exhibit. And one of those students, Nicole Allison, who had no previous interest in railroading, never probably thought about it, through that association and through the work here at the museum, said, what about women? What about women in railroading? And so she wanted to have an intervention that introduced women at every turn of railroad history. And so she decided for her master's thesis at Sac State to produce an exhibit plan. That exhibit plan eventually morphed into Crossing Lines, Women of the American Railroad.
It's really challenging to give historic individuals who are not represented in the majority of historical literature that independent voice. Rosina Tucker wrote a fabulous book about her life. It's her autobiography. She lived until she was 105, and she was an activist her entire life.
Rosina Tucker had an extraordinary life. Her parents actually were enslaved. She was married for about 18 years and her husband passed. She got married a second time, and the second marriage was to a man named Bertram Tucker, and he was a Pullman porter. A Pullman porter would be in charge of one car. They were luxury cars. He was in charge of everything that happened on that car and taking care of all the passengers that traveled on the car. They worked very hard for very low wages. And they wanted to be unionized, but they weren't allowed in the union. But it was a very tricky thing to be developing a union, because any kind of union activity, I think we still see this today, if you know that you're developing a union, you're really putting your job on the line. Getting women involved in helping to create the union would be a really good way of sort of doing this in a way that wasn't very obvious. Because women can get together, they visit each other's homes, and this is exactly what Rosina Tucker did.
Rosina Tucker, who was highly involved in the long attempt to create a Pullman Porters Union. And it turns out to have a brotherhood of Pullman Porters, you needed a sisterhood.
She worked really hard, and she worked hard at convincing the men and their wives that the best way to get their rights, to be paid more, to work fewer hours, is to have a union behind you to fight for your rights. Anna Judah, in her day, in the 1850s, again, what was expected of a woman? She came from a wealthy family. She was married to a professional man. What would have been expected of her at that time is to take care of the home and to get involved in charity work. She got very involved with supporting her husband, and not only supporting him, but accompanying him in accomplishing this dream. He got the job working with the Sacramento Valley Railroad, but he always had this dream for the Transcontinental Railroad. He lobbied Washington, D.C. That meant that he was going from California back to Washington, D.C. Yep, he went back and forth about 4 or 5 times, and Anna accompanied him on all of these. She organized the paperwork. She accompanied him in the trips that he took up to the Sierra. She was a wonderful artist. She painted watercolors. She collected samples of the flowers there. This was all part of the presentation that Judah made to the lawmakers to get their approval. In one of the letters that I read that Theodore wrote to his wife, to Anna, and he says, you know, I'd love it if you came up here, but you better make yourself a pair of pantaloons. So don't come in your dress. You need to wear pants, but women didn't wear pants, right? So, and it's not like she could just go to the store and buy a pair. She had to make herself some pantaloons and put on those boots, and then she went up to the Sierra. So she was a woman that we say was ahead of her time. And if it wasn't for her, would Theodore Judah have been as successful at what he did? If it wasn't for her wanting to come to California in the first place, what would that have been like? What would that have done to, I think about history? Would the Transcontinental Railroad have been built the way it was? Would it have been here in Sacramento? You know, I don't know, but Anna, of course, accompanied him, and that's what happened.
It's a well-rounded, well-conceived, complex, nuanced story about women and the various contributions and interactions that they had with American railroading.
Every single one of the women in this exhibit had a huge impact on the railroad. We're talking about the history of all of these women and their impacts, and I couldn't choose one of them to have the most impact because they all had great impact. I feel like history is compounding, you know? Even the smallest impact of Anna Judah sorting Theodore Judah's notes to take to Congress to ask for the Transcontinental Railroad has changed the country forever. For me to see women here reflects myself. And so now I see, oh, there are women throughout history who have made impact, and I can make that kind of impact too.
All right, folks, let's take a look at the Gilmore backyard. These are your current temperatures. And then, of course, looking at your 10-day. Some good weekend weather there, especially if you're heading to the Aftershock Festival this weekend. We are back after this. We've got an exciting update on the very first story we brought you back here on To the Point back in August. We spoke with two Northern California companies that build homes using 3D printing. They use different materials and each has a different approach. Well, just days ago, Emergent 3D Up and Writing officially began 3D printing its first house, which they say, to their knowledge, is the first on-site 3D printed California Building Code approved house in the entire state. Take a look. Emergent 3D is printing its first ever home here in Redding's Enterprise Park, where the park host will live. Later this fall, Emergent 3D plans on printing homes in Paradise, which is still rebuilding after the 2018 campfire. The company is printing what it calls its Wildfire Restoration House, a 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home that meets California's requirements for building in wildfire-prone areas. Emergent 3D says it'll cost about 11% less than a conventionally built home of the same size.
We actually take the material, we formulate and mix it up ourselves. When we get the consistency just right, we pump it through the machine and it works its way through the hoses that you see here and all the way down to the print head, and the print head is controlled by the computer, which tells it exactly where the walls are, and it just lays out extruded layers of concrete that are 2 inches wide by 1.5 inches tall. And it'll do one layer of every wall, and then another layer, and then another layer until it builds it up to 8 feet high.
Pretty neat, huh? I was just talking with Emergent 3D's founder. He said the team at Enterprise Park in Redding was printing as we spoke, and that they've submitted their site plan to the town of Paradise. And once approved, they hope to begin building that wildfire restoration home sometime in November. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We always want to hear what's going on in your world. Please message us on Instagram, Facebook. You can email the team at tothepoint@abc10.com. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, it's Alex. Just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I really love hearing from everyone, and I hope that you'll stay in touch. Reach out to me on Facebook at AlexBellTV, or you can email me at tothepoint@abc10.com, or you can even send me a text message at 916-321-3310.